A man spent his entire life adhering to a simple, almost austere rule: never interfere with the workings of the wild, for he knew it has its own laws that humans have no right to break. But one cold and anxious night, he stepped over this conviction to save a tiny, dying wolf cub, and at the time he couldn't even imagine that years later, a grown wolf would return to his home, and this meeting would change not only his solitary life but his very understanding of the boundary between man and the wild. On the edge of the windy plains of Idaho lived an elderly man named Nathan Hale. His house stood almost at the very edge of the forest, where sparse trees gradually thickened into a dense, dark thicket, beyond which began a world beyond human control, harsh, cold, and living by its own ancient, immutable laws. Nathan had long been accustomed to solitude, which had become for him not a burden, but a part of daily life. His days were spent working the land, tending to a modest farm, making rare trips to a small town for supplies, and long evenings filled with silence, where only the wind, the creaking of old boards, and the occasional crackle of fire in the stove could be heard. Sometimes at night, the long howl of wolves reached him, and then he would freeze, listening to this wild voice as if trying to understand what lay behind the sound: a threat, a call, or simply life flowing by its own rules. One early morning, as the sky was just beginning to brighten and the cold sunlight barely touched the ground, he noticed movement at the edge of his field, and there, not hiding, stood a she-wolf, calm, motionless, and confident. She made no attempt to run, showed no aggression, but simply looked straight at him, and in that gaze there was no fear, only strength and a clear understanding of her place in this world. Nathan stopped, not daring to approach, and in that brief moment when their eyes met, he felt not anxiety but a deep, almost inexplicable respect that rarely arises between man and wild beast. The wolf stood for a while longer, as if memorizing him, then calmly turned and disappeared among the trees, leaving behind a feeling that Nathan could not explain in words. A few days later, she appeared again, but not alone. A large male walked beside her, wary and attentive, and they kept a greater distance as if checking whether this place was safe, whether it could be trusted. From then on, Nathan began to notice them more often. Sometimes they walked along the edge of the field. Sometimes they stopped, watching from afar, and he did not try to drive them away, made no sudden movements, but only watched, gradually realizing that his land had become part of their route, part of their life. Over time, he saw them again, but now small, clumsy silhouettes flickered next to the she-wolf. Pups running through the grass, stumbling, playing with each other, and rising again, and in their funny, awkward movements, future strength and confidence could already be guessed. The wolf watched them closely, sometimes gently guiding them, and there was so much natural care in this that Nathan involuntarily lingered, feeling how in his soul, long accustomed to silence, a warm feeling appeared that he had not experienced for many years. He began to go out onto the porch more often, just to see them, to make sure they had come again, that this quiet, almost imperceptible contact between his world and the wild continued. But one evening the habitual flow of life was disrupted. When the sun was already sinking toward the horizon and long shadows lay on the ground, he heard a barely discernible squeak coming from the direction of an old fallen tree. The sound was weak, but there was an anxiety in it that made him stop and listen. Nathan slowly approached and saw a tiny wolf cub lying in the grass almost motionless. Its breath was barely noticeable, and its body was as cold as the ground beneath it. He stopped because he knew one must not interfere. That is how the wild is arranged. The weak do not survive, and this is not cruelty, but a law. He stood looking at the little one and tried to convince himself to leave everything as it was, but something inside resisted this decision, not allowing him to simply turn around and walk away. Carefully, almost holding his breath, he leaned over and picked up the cub, which turned out to be so light, as if there was almost no life left in it. And then he brought it into the house, built a fire, and wrapped it in a warm blanket, trying to bring back its warmth. From that moment, his life changed, filled with care, anxiety, and new meaning. He fed the cub every few hours, woke up at night to check if it was breathing, warmed it when it began to shiver, and the days began to merge into one continuous movement where there was nothing superfluous. Sometimes it seemed to him that it was all in vain, that nature would take its own anyway, but with each passing day the cub became a little stronger. First it opened its eyes, then it began to move, tried to stand, fell, and rose again, and in these small efforts Nathan saw a real struggle for life. Over time, the cub grew stronger, began to walk confidently, explore the house, sniff everything around, and follow Nathan wherever he went, and in its gaze appeared trust, pure, unconditional, requiring no explanation. Nathan named him Logan, and this name seemed right to him, as if it reflected the strength and freedom that sooner or later had to manifest. But the stronger their bond became, the clearer Nathan understood that Logan did not belong to him, that this was a wild creature, and its place was where there were no walls or borders, in the forest among its own kind. On the advice of a wildlife specialist, he began to gradually prepare him for return, reducing contact, giving more space, stopping feeding him by hand so that he would learn to survive on his own. And each such step was difficult because attachment had already become part of his life. And one evening, what he both expected and feared happened. At the edge of the field, the she-wolf appeared again, the very same one, and beside her stood grown wolves, strong, attentive, ready for life in the wild. Logan froze, then whimpered softly, and the wolf replied with a long, low sound that held something familiar and recognizable. Nathan opened the enclosure, his hands trembling, but he understood there was no other way, and Logan took a step forward, then another, stopped, turned for a moment as if saying goodbye, and then slowly headed toward the she-wolf. She came closer, sniffed him as if making sure it was really him, lingered for a second, then turned and went toward the forest, and Logan followed her without looking back immediately. They left slowly, and before disappearing among the trees he still turned around, and their eyes met, and in that short moment there was everything: goodbye, gratitude, understanding. Years passed, and Nathan continued to live his quiet life, but now it no longer seemed empty because this memory and this sense of connection remained in it. Every winter he noticed tracks at the edge of the field, sometimes saw silhouettes among the trees, and understood that the wolves were returning, that they remembered this place and considered it safe. They kept their distance but no longer hid as cautiously as before, and their presence became part of his world. And one evening, when the sky was painted with the soft light of sunset, he saw the she-wolf again, now an adult, confident, and beside her were her cubs. She stopped at the edge of the field, looked at him for a long time, calmly, without fear, and in her gaze was recognition, quiet and clear. And then Nathan realized that she remembered everything. Dear viewers, what do you think of this story? Please tell us in the comments, and if you liked this video, give it a like and subscribe to our channel. Goodbye.